What is the address of the emergency?
East 23rd. I was just trying to get strangled.
Okay, do you have a unit letter or number going on?
I was just trying to get strangled.
Me and my 3 kids.
You and your 3 kids? Okay. The 3 and 4-year-old, were they upstairs? Okay. And then where's your 9-year-old?
They're all upstairs.
They're all upstairs?
We were all up there.
Okay.
We just got up and I was going to give them a bath.
Who's in the kitchen? Somebody's in the kitchen a little bit older than 9, though. They're not 9 years old.
I couldn't even tell you.
You couldn't even tell you?
All that.
It's just past 3 in the morning. A phone rings at a 911 dispatch center in Tampa, Florida. A young woman's voice comes through, shaky and confused. "I just woke up," she says. "I was strangled." The dispatcher asks her to explain. The girl says she blacked out. She says her mother did it. Then she says something else. She says her mother is right outside her bedroom door. There's a sound. Maybe a door opening. Maybe footsteps. The line goes dead. For the next several minutes, dispatchers try to call back. No answer. They send police to the address anyway, because that's the job. You don't wait to find out if a call like that was serious. What the officers find when they get there will stay with them for a long time. This is the story of Natavia Sanders, an 18-year-old girl from Erie, Pennsylvania, who moved to Florida to start a new chapter of her life. It's the story of the mother, accused of ending it. And it's the story of a case that, more than a year later, is still not finished. Before Tampa, there was Erie. Erie is a mid-sized city on the edge of Lake Erie in northwestern Pennsylvania. It's the kind of place where everybody seems to know somebody who knows somebody. Natavia Sanders grew up there, one of many siblings in a large family. Public records, connected to her later obituary list, 10 brothers and sisters. She went to school in the Erie School District. As a kid, she was a cheerleader at Strong Vincent Middle School, cheering on the sidelines the way a lot of 13-year-olds do, without any idea of what was still ahead of her. By the time she was a teenager, Natavia's life had already been through some changes. At some point, she and her mother, Rotesha Silveus, left Erie and moved down to the Tampa, Florida area. Natavia kept going to school anyway. She enrolled remotely, finishing her studies through the Erie School District's online program, even while she was living 1,300 miles away in Florida. She was closing in on her high school diploma. She was weeks away from graduating. That detail matters. It's easy, when a story turns tragic, to only remember the ending. But Natavia wasn't just a name in a police report. She was a senior in high school, doing the unglamorous, everyday work of finishing her classes online, planning for a life after graduation that she was so close to reaching. She had brothers and sisters back in Pennsylvania. She had a childhood full of ordinary things: cheer practice, middle school hallways, a hometown she'd left behind but hadn't fully let go of. In the spring of 2024, she was living with her mother in a house in Tampa. Also in the home, according to later reporting, were younger siblings, children around 9, 5, and 3 years old. It was a full house. It was, on the surface, a family living an ordinary life in Florida. Then came the night of May 11th. The exact details of what happened inside that house before the phone call may never be fully known outside of a courtroom. But here is what has been reported, based on police records and the criminal complaint filed in the case. In the very early hours of May 11th, 2024, Natavia Sanders called 911. She told the dispatcher she had been strangled. She said she'd just woken up after passing out. As she talked, she said her mother was outside her bedroom door. Then, according to the affidavit, there was a sound like a door opening. Seconds later, the call cut off. Dispatchers tried to get her back on the line. When that didn't work, police were sent to the home, located in a neighborhood in the 1900 block of East 23rd Avenue in Tampa. When officers arrived, the house was locked up tight. Both the front door and the back door were secured. The officers knocked and knocked. According to reports, they stood at that door for 6 minutes, waiting for someone to answer, while whatever was happening inside kept happening without them. 6 minutes doesn't sound like much. Read it in a sentence, and it passes in a second. But stand at a locked door for 6 minutes sometime, waiting, not knowing what's on the other side, and you'll understand how long that actually is. Finally, the door opened. A woman stood there, later identified as 38-year-old Rotesha Silveus, Natavia's mother. When officers asked her to step outside so they could talk, she reportedly refused, telling them, "For what?" and moving to shut the door again. The officers didn't let her close it. They wedged the door open with a foot. A struggle followed. Officers eventually got Silveus under control and detained her. Then they went into the house to find Natavia. Body cam footage from the scene, later reported by news outlets, captured an officer's reaction the moment they found her. It was raw, unscripted, the kind of thing you say when you're not thinking about how it'll sound later, just reacting to something terrible in front of you. They found Natavia on the floor. She was unresponsive. Officers immediately started CPR. In situations like this, every second counts, and the officers on scene didn't wait for paramedics to start working. Tampa Fire Rescue arrived and took over, rushing Natavia to a nearby hospital in critical condition. Meanwhile, outside, Silveus was placed in the back of a patrol car. According to later reporting on body cam footage, she was handcuffed behind her back, lying down in the seat, her body shaking. When officers had her sit up so they could search her, she appeared to be conscious, breathing hard, staring ahead. What she said to police in that moment was not made public. She was taken to Orient Road Jail. At first, she was booked on charges of resisting an officer with violence and aggravated battery causing great bodily harm. At that point, no one yet knew whether Natavia would survive. For 2 days, she didn't wake up. At the hospital, doctors ran tests. According to reports, 2 separate tests showed no brain activity. On May 13, 2024, 2 days after the phone call that started it all, Natavia Sanders was pronounced dead. She was 18 years old. When someone dies suddenly and violently, it falls to the medical examiner to determine exactly what happened to the body, and just as importantly, to rule on how the person died. Was it natural causes? An accident? Something else? The Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office reviewed Natavia's case and ruled her death a homicide. Investigators said her injuries were consistent with strangulation. That ruling changed everything about the case. What had started as charges related to resisting arrest and battery was no longer the full picture. On May 24, 2024, less than 2 weeks after the 911 call, Tampa police detectives announced that Rotesha Silveus had been charged with first-degree murder in her daughter's death. Tampa Police Chief Lee Burkaw spoke publicly about the case at the time. He called it a heartbreaking case and offered condolences to everyone who knew and loved Natavia. He said the work of the department's detectives showed a commitment to seeing justice done. It's a formal, careful kind of statement, the kind police departments release when they want to acknowledge a tragedy without getting ahead of a case that still has to go through the courts. But underneath the careful wording is a simple, awful fact. A mother had been arrested and charged with killing her own daughter, and an 18-year-old girl who had just been weeks from a high school diploma was gone. Silveus remained in the Orient Road Jail, held without the kind of quick resolution that true crime stories sometimes promise. In real life, cases like this don't wrap up in an hour. They stretch on. And this one was about to take a turn that would slow it down even further. Criminal trials are built on a basic idea. The person on trial has to be able to understand what's happening to them and help their own lawyer defend them. If a person isn't mentally able to do that, the court can't move forward with a trial. Not yet, anyway. That question came up in Silveus's case. Her defense attorneys filed a motion asking the court to have her evaluated for competency to stand trial. A judge agreed, and Silveus underwent a mental health evaluation. In the summer of 2024, the results came back. According to reporting on the case, a medical examiner found that Silveus was not mentally fit to stand trial at that time. The recommendation was that she be committed to the custody of Florida's Department of Children and Families, so she could receive treatment at a mental health facility, rather than remain in a standard jail cell. On October 3, 2024, Silveus was released from Orient Road Jail, not to freedom, but to involuntary placement in a mental health treatment facility. A judge would later formally commit her to a state hospital for treatment, with a hearing scheduled to check on her progress the following January. This is one of the parts of the story that doesn't fit neatly into a simple narrative of a villain and a victim. Mental competency proceedings exist because the legal system recognizes that not everyone charged with a crime is in a state of mind to understand a courtroom, let alone participate in their own defense. Whatever was happening with Silveus, mentally, in the months after her daughter's death, it was serious enough that trained evaluators determined she needed treatment before the court could even ask her to enter a plea. She stayed in that facility for weeks. Then, at the end of October 2024, Florida's Department of Children and Families made a new determination. Silveus was now competent to proceed, or, under the technical wording used in the order, she no longer met the criteria for continued commitment. She was returned to police custody. On January 29, 2025, a Florida court formally found Rotesha Silveus competent to stand trial, following a forensic psychiatric evaluation and a criminal competency assessment. The long pause in the case was over. The path toward a trial was open again. With competency restored, the case moved forward. A first hearing was scheduled for May 14, 2025, almost exactly a year after Natavia's death. The hearing took place, but like a lot of hearings in complicated felony cases, it didn't settle much. It was continued, meaning the court set another date to pick things up again. A second hearing was scheduled for August 20th, 2025. By this point, Silveus faced a set of serious charges: first-degree murder, along with resisting arrest with violence and resisting arrest without violence, tied to her struggle with officers on the night of the 911 call. She remained in custody at the Hillsborough County Jail as the case crept forward. News of the case had, by then, traveled well beyond Tampa. Because Natavia and her mother had ties to Erie, Pennsylvania, Natavia's hometown, where she'd once cheered on a middle school sideline, local Erie news stations picked up the story and followed it closely. Viewers who had grown up in the same city, gone to the same schools, or simply remembered a young girl from their community, were watching a case unfold 1,000 miles away, waiting for updates that came slowly, one hearing at a time. There is a strange, uncomfortable rhythm to cases like this from the outside. A tragedy happens fast, in the span of a single 911 call and a few terrible minutes at a locked door. But justice, if it comes at all, moves on a completely different clock. Competency evaluations, psychiatric commitments, continued hearings. For a family grieving a daughter, sister, or friend, the space between charged with murder and trial can stretch into years, filled mostly with waiting. One detail that surfaced later in public discussion of the case, and which deserves to be handled with care rather than turned into spectacle, is that there were other children in the home the night Natavia died. Young siblings, far too young to be pulled into a courtroom story. Whatever they may have seen or heard that night is not something this story will speculate on in detail. It's enough to say that a house that held 4 children on an ordinary Friday night held, by Sunday, only grief. It's worth pausing here too, on Natavia herself. Not the 911 call, not the injuries, not the legal terms, but who she actually was. She was a daughter with 9 or 10 siblings, depending on which family record you look at. She was a former cheerleader. She was a high school senior, finishing her diploma the hard way, through online classes, while living far from the hometown that had once known her as a kid on a football sideline. She was 18, an age that's supposed to be the start of something. College, a job, an apartment of her own, a future stretched out ahead like an open road. True crime stories can sometimes forget this part. It's easy to get pulled into the mechanics of a case, the charges, the hearings, the competency questions, and lose sight of the fact that at the center of all of it is a person who is no longer here. Natavia Sanders should be remembered as more than the subject of a police report. She was a kid from Erie who almost made it to graduation. As of the most recent public reporting, Rotesha Silveus's case has not gone to trial. She remains charged with first-degree murder, along with the resisting arrest charges connected to the night officers came to the house. She has been held in the Hillsborough County Jail as hearings continue. It's important to say plainly what that means. Under the law, she has not been found guilty of anything. She is accused. The evidence described in this story, the 911 call, the locked doors, the injuries the medical examiner said were consistent with strangulation, the body cam footage, is the evidence that has been made public through police statements and court filings. It will ultimately be up to a jury, not a news article, and not a story like this one, to weigh that evidence and decide what happened inside that house. What is certain, and what nobody disputes, is this. On May 11, 2024, an 18-year-old girl called 911 asking for help. On May 13, 2024, she died in a Tampa hospital. In between those two dates, something happened that a medical examiner ruled a homicide, and more than a year later, the legal system built to answer the question of what really happened is still working through it, one hearing at a time. There's a photo that circulates sometimes in coverage of this case. Natavia Sanders, as a much younger girl, in a cheerleading uniform, at a middle school in Erie, Pennsylvania, years before any of this happened. It's an ordinary school photo. Nothing about it hints at where her life would eventually lead. That's often the hardest part of stories like this one. Not the crime itself, but the ordinary life that came before it. The version of the story where nothing tragic happens at all, where a girl grows up, finishes school, and goes on to whatever came next. That version of Natavia's story existed for 18 years. It just didn't get to keep going. Somewhere in Tampa, a courtroom is still working through what happened on East 23rd Avenue in the early hours of May 11, 2024. Somewhere in Erie, a community that once watched a young girl cheer on a middle school sideline is still watching, from a distance, to see how her story ends in the eyes of the law. For now, all anyone can do is wait for that answer, and remember that before she was a name in a police report, Natavia Sanders was simply a girl from Erie, closing in on a high school diploma, with a whole life still ahead of her.